going on? YouTube. I'm just on the interstate on my way to Montana. We got a little mule deer hunt that we're gonna be filming here for about the next 6-7 days. So headed off to do that. I've been gone for the last 5 days or so out in the Dakota, South Dakota, North Dakota, and we've been filming some fishing out there. But I just wanted to kind of pop on here and talk about what my strategy is going to be here going into the opener Wisconsin bow season. You know, across the country we've got archery season opening. Some states are already open. We've got North Dakota that's open. For sure, as far as deer. Antelope's been open for a couple weeks here out west. But I want to talk a little bit about my approach to early season hunting for whitetails. Now, a lot of my farms are not necessarily geared for that early season time period. Now, I'm usually banking on that mid-period of October to really start dialing in, picking out a handful of bucks that I think are killable and that have the age class that I'm looking for, have the habits, have the tendencies, and then I might have some experience with them as well. But as far as that early season time period, it's a very predictable time frame where you can get on a really old deer and get him killed without disturbing too much if you're smart. Now, I have a farm in specific that I'm thinking of here. It is, I would say it's 95% meant for early season hunting. It's a lot of ag fields. Historically, it's a lot of hay. This year it's hay with silage corn on it. But it doesn't have a whole lot as far as bedding cover. Now, this is one of those destination properties. I diagnose properties based on what I think the majority of the deer are attracted to. Now, I kind of have a few different sections that I put these properties in. You have those holding properties that are either going to be big enough where you're holding a lot of deer as far as bedding cover, and those are properties that the deer necessarily aren't leaving too often. Now, those are the properties that you have to be extremely smart when you're hunting, because these deer aren't leaving. They could be bedding on the property and feeding on the property, and that's what I consider a holding property. And you have to be smart, because when they're bedding and feeding on that same property, you have a likelihood of running into them more consistently, and you're going to be dealing with a lot more potential to spook those deer. So you have to be very careful when you're dealing with one of those bigger holding properties where you have food and cover, and those deer are spending a disproportionate amount of time on that property. That's when you have to really dial in your assets, your hunting pressure, and you have to pick and choose those days that you are going to put you are going to go in and hunt those deer. You've got to make sure that it's a good cold front day, your wind is very good, your access is good, your exit strategy is good, and you have to be smart with that to prolong that attraction on that property. Now, those transition properties are more of those properties where, your deer, you're not holding very many deer, right? And if you are holding deer, it's not very consistent, right? You don't have those distinct bedding areas that are holding, half a dozen to a dozen deer all in one chunk. Maybe it's, a property that's 10, 15, up to 30 acres. You don't have a lot of good bedding habitat. And a lot of times it's on those smaller properties. One in specific that I hunt, it's a real neck down property. There's big chunks of timber on either side. It's that barbell movement. You got big bedding on either side of it, and it pinches down and squeezes down to this 30-some acre property, and these deer just funnel up and down through there, going from big destination bedding to big destination bedding. And during the rut, when you've got bucks cruising, they're using that property a heck of a lot more than than they would during the early season or during the late season, because in the form of food value, there's not a lot. In the form of cover value, there's not a whole lot. Um, and it's one of those properties where it's a distinct time frame that's really good, and that's during that um, uh, early peak rut stages into the peak rut, and then maybe a little bit during post rut if you luck into a doe cruising through here dragging a buck by. But for the most part, that would be one of those transition properties. Now, the third property is going to be, that destination property. And that could either be a destination property when it comes to food, or it could be a destination property when it comes to bedding habitat. Now, the property that is geared for early season that I hunt, that is a destination food property. And now what I mean by that is the deer are not staying there, but they're feeding there. So they're traveling from one of those holding properties that has a good quality bedding habitat, and they're traveling to that destination food property. And now that can make it tricky to hunt these deer, but it also sets up really nicely for an early season afternoon food source movement hunt, because those deer are nowhere close, right? They're not staying on that property. And once that last hour of daylight hits, they start gravitating towards that destination food source, and you're already set up there, and they have no idea that you're there. That's why it sets up really nice. That's why I like hunting it during that early season time period, because for the majority of the people, you're not hunting mornings during that early season. The deer aren't spending a lot of time up on their feet during those early morning hours. It doesn't make a lot of sense. The temperatures are still really warm, and they're on that summer pattern still. And so they're gravitating to that destination food property at the last, hour to a half hour of daylight, and that's what I'm focused on this time of the year. I'm focused on what food source are they focusing on right now, and we're still in September, so there's still 90% of these deer, at least in the Midwest, are still on that green alfalfa, and they're still on the green soybean. But once those soybeans start to brown out as we get closer and closer to October, they're going to gravitate off of that, and they're going to start transitioning to, maybe it's going to be acorns, maybe it's going to be soft mass apples, fruit trees of any form. Apples specifically in Wisconsin, they really start to smash those towards the end of September and then into early October there, as long as that crop lasts. A lot of people talk about that October lull, that first week to week and a half of October, where they're not seeing any activity. Well, it turns out that wherever you have big acorn populations or big acorn tonnage, those deer are in there. And when you have those big acorn crops, deer are not forced to leave the timber. If the deer has the opportunity to stay in cover and still feed, they're going to do so, especially in a high hunter pressure state like Wisconsin, like Michigan, like Minnesota. If the deer have the opportunity to feed in the timber where they have cover surrounding them and they have the high quality food source available, they're going to stay on that food source as long as it lasts. So that October lull argument, in my opinion, is not true. You're hunting in the wrong locations. You're still on those summer pattern food sources that the deer are no longer hitting. If you're hunting a dried out bean field in the early stages of October, good luck. Those deer are not there. Now, those dried out soybeans, if they're still standing or once they get cut and they're spilled towards the end of October and then into November, those are high quality locations to catch deer on. But during that dry leaf period in the early parts of October there, they are not on those beans. They're going to be on the soft mass apple trees, and they're going to be on the acorns. So lock in on where those two specific types of food sources are, and you're going to see a heck of a lot more deer during that early time period in October. Now, my approach on the 13th of September, given the right wind direction, giving the right situation, I guess, I'm not too worried about cold fronts during this early time period, strictly because a lot of these bucks are still on that summer pattern. And during the summer, it's 80 degrees in the evening. You know, as it starts to drop a couple degrees, the deer are still going to be out in the field. So before these deer start to feel pressure, they're still going to be feeding and get out to that food source during daylight hours because they're on that summer pattern. Now, once they start to feel a little bit of pressure, you're going to be more reliant on those cold fronts to get those deer out early because that forces them biologically to get out and feed. They sense a weather pattern shifting. Now, during this early time period, you have to be extremely careful not to tip these deer off because they are on that non-pressure early season movement, and if you screw that up the first time in, you're not going to see it again, right? I like to think that, you know, if you screw up a buck during that second week of September, you might have to wait again until the first week of October before he starts to calm down, settle down, and get locked back on a consistent pattern. Because you're basically telling him, hey, I'm here, hey, I'm hunting you, and at the same time, it depends on how bad you spook him, right? If you spook him just, he smells you, but he smells you close, he's going to be boogered up pretty bad. But if he just hears something, you know, maybe he's bedded and you drive in on your walk-in, maybe he catches you. That's not necessarily the end of the world, but I like to think that if they do smell you and you are hunting and they're out on that evening food source movement and they haven't smelled a hunter for the last 8-9 months here, you're really going to screw him up and get him off that pattern. But being very careful, being extremely surgical on that evening food source movement during the early season here, focusing on green alfalfa fields, green hay fields, focusing on apple trees if they're starting to drop, and then roll into late September, early October there, really starting to focus on those acorn trees, because that is definitely going to be your ticket as far as the October lull kind of idea behind things. That's what I'm focused on when I get back home here from Montana. On the 13th, I'm going to be getting a little bit creative as far as my first setup for the year, thinking that I'll actually be setting up in the cornfield, making a blind in the corn, focusing on one deer in specific that is a hammer. And if I can get a wind out of the west, out of the northwest, out of the southwest, I think I can get in tight enough where a pattern can stay on that long enough for the next week so I can get out in the woods and try to kill them. So that's my strategy as far as the early season hunting. I'm picking and choosing. You know, if I don't have trail camera pictures telling me that there's a deer on his feet during daylight doing a specific thing, I don't think there's a point to go out, right? Now, you can't completely rely on trail cameras because I've seen a lot of deer skirt cameras. They know where they're at. They take a different trail. They could be out in that field. So you have to use a little bit of woodsmanship. I've personally scouted this field a few times this year, and I've seen this deer out in the field when I didn't get pictures of him, so I know he's spending time. He's just using different trails on any given night. But at the same time, I can still get him close enough to get an arrow. So if you guys are thinking about getting out on that early season afternoon food source movement on a deer, play it smart. Make sure you have the right wind direction because it can be costly if you do booger out of there during that early season time period. You might not see him again until October rolls around. So focus on the ag fields as far as alfalfa, green alfalfa. If you've got a good clover plot, they're still pounding those, especially if they were freshly mowed. Your food plots, if you've got forest beans, if you've got late planted soybeans, if you've got oats in there that are not over mature yet, if you've got early planted or late planted rye that's just starting to get green, those deer are going to target that during that first week of October as well, because Uh, Historically, in that first week, second week of October, you're going to get that first frost. And when you get that first frost, you're killing off a lot of the foliage, especially on that second, third, fourth frost. A lot of the foliage in the timber is going to start to die. A lot of that green foliage is going to be dying off. That rye is not going to be turning brown on you. It's going to stay green for you. If you've got rye somewhere that's young and lush, they're going to be targeting that heavily. Like I said, those apple trees, soft mass trees, whether it be pears, peaches, apples, plums, those are all going to be highly attractive. If you have a cluster of those that have good tonnage this fall, focus on those, get in on those, because that's a short time frame that target those. You're looking at on the high end 2 to 3 weeks, because once those things start dropping, the whole herd's on, right? Those are extremely attractive. Those deer are pounding those, so they don't last long. It's a short time frame that you can target deer on those soft mass producing trees. The acorn, same thing. It's a short time period. As long as that crop lasts, the deer are going to be on them. As soon as that crop's gone, they're on to something new. So always focusing on the food source that's prevalent at that given time. I like to bank on green in September. Once October rolls around, soft mass, acorns, and then back to green once you get those first freezing temperatures that are killing off a lot of the green foliage growing in the timber, growing in the ag fields. Then I'm focused on the food plots, the green food plots, the brassicas, that late planted winter rye that's young and lush, that the deer are loving at this time of the year. And then you roll into the pre-rut stages, peak rut stages, post-rut stages, where the bucks aren't feeding hardly at all. You're focused on transition areas, doe bedding areas, cruising conditions, and then back to the late season, you're right back to the drawing board as far as what is the most attractive food source at this time. So, hope that helps you guys. I'm just bored on this drive here. I got about 3 hours left before I get to Montana. I'll shack up for the night, and then we're getting into camp here tomorrow. But hope that helps you guys. A few of the tips that were on my mind, what I'm focused on rolling into the opener here in Wisconsin. It's going to be a heck of a year. We got good deer all over the place. We got food plots that are doing excellent, and it should be fun. I hope you guys have good luck, and I'll catch you later.